the world's first major terrorist attack since World War II. But who are the people behind the outrage?
By now, many know about the following heinous attacks by the Zionists. But there is one terrorist attack they tried to memory hole most. First, let's do a quick recap. 1924, assassination of Dutch Jewish poet and correspondent of the Daily Express, Jacob Israel de Haan, in Palestine, because of his outspoken anti-Zionist views that were influencing world Jewry. 1946, bombing the British Administrative Office in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem by Zionists dressed as Arabs. More than 90 people were killed. 1947, the kidnapping and hanging of 2 British sergeants and later booby-trapping their bodies by Zionists in Palestine. 1954, Zionist terrorists tried to bomb British, Egyptian, and American-owned libraries and theaters in Egypt to make it look like Egypt was behind it. They failed. 1948, the Zionists massacred and destroyed the Palestinian village of Deir Yassin. More than 110 people died. Horrors were perpetrated on the villagers. 1947 to 1949, Zionist forces, consisting of the terrorist groups the Irgun, Haganah, and the Stern Gang, had taken more than 78% of historic Palestine, ethnically cleansed and destroyed about 530 villages and cities, and killed about 15,000 Palestinians in a series of mass atrocities, including more than 70 massacres. 1967, Israel launches a brutal attack on the American USS Liberty intelligence ship in international waters near the coast of the Sinai Peninsula, with napalm, torpedoes, and machine guns. 34 American crew members were killed and more than 170 wounded. U.S. rescue planes were called back twice by the White House, and no retaliatory actions against Israel ever occurred. 1982, Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camp massacre in Lebanon, perpetrated by a Lebanese militia under the political and military control of Israel. Between 2,000 and 3,500 men, women and children were murdered during 3 days of horrors with backing of invading Israeli forces. The UN later declared it as an act of genocide. The personally responsible defense minister Ariel Sharon was forced to resign, but later on still became the prime minister of Israel. Now, knowing about the former attacks is less of a threat to the Zionist ideology than knowing about the Zionist bombing of the Patriot ship in Palestine filled with Jewish illegal immigrants. Here's what happened. To grasp why they did it and what occurred, you first have to be aware of the following.
My father went to with some boys, I don't know, some Zionist group or something, and he came home with the idea, we are leaving here and going to Palestine. My mother told him, where is Palestine? What is Palestine? Where to go? How are we going to reach the place, and what is there? And her parents said, it is only camels and sand. What are you going to do there? And she did not tell her mother that she is pregnant.
In 1939, with war in the offing, the oil pipeline from Iraq through Palestine became one of Britain's major strategic worries, along with the Suez Canal, the empire's lifeline to the Far East. To ensure an uninterrupted supply of oil for its planes, tanks, and ships, Britain had to maintain peace at all costs with the predominantly Arab population, which had long been resentful of Jewish immigration. To this end, London issued a white paper which strictly limited the number of Jews admitted into Palestine.
In the view of the British government,
the continuation of wholly unregulated transfers of land from Arabs to Jews is bound to exacerbate the present differences between the two communities and thus postpone indefinitely the harmony which alone can bring contentment in Palestine.
Later on, an Arab spokesperson in London said the following about Jewish immigration to Palestine.
Every Jew that arrives in Palestine is one more brick in the structure of the proposed Zionist state, one more unit towards the Zionist majority against the Arabs, so that it is impossible for the Arabs to regard the matter only in its humanitarian aspect. The political question was finally settled by the White Paper, and any attempt to force more refugees on Palestine now, on whatever grounds it is ostensibly made, would be a breach.
The Zionists' main concern was immigration to Palestine. Why? The founder of the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, born in Budapest, stated, quote, Palestine and Argentina. In both countries, important experiments in colonization have been made, though on the mistaken principle of a gradual infiltration of Jews. An infiltration is bound to end in disaster. It continues till the inevitable moment when the native population feels itself threatened and forces the government to stop the further influx of Jews. Immigration is consequently futile unless based on an assured supremacy. He went on to state, those Jews who fall in with our idea of a state will attach themselves to the society, which will thereby be authorized to confer and treat with government in the name of our people. The society will thus be acknowledged in its relations with governments as a state-creating power. This acknowledgement will practically create the state. Their priority is an ongoing influx of Jewish immigrants because this means subsequently a majority over the natives, which would bring about the Zionist state. Ben-Gurion, a prominent Zionist figure, said in 1938, after the Night of Broken Glass in Germany, quote, If I knew it was possible to save all the Jewish children of Germany by their transfer to England, and only half of them by transferring them to Eretz Yisrael, I would choose the latter. End quote. In 1942, he said, quote, The catastrophe of European Jewry is not, in a direct manner, my business. End quote. Just as sinister is this quote from George Landauer, the director of the Jewish Settlement Agency, in a letter to Stephen Wise, the leader of American Zionism, about European Jewish refugees dated February 13, 1938, quote, I am writing this letter at the request of Dr. Weizmann because we're extremely concerned lest the problem, unquote, referring to the refugees, quote, be presented in a way which can prejudice the activity for Eretz Israel, end quote, referring to creation of a Zionist state in Palestine, quote, even if the conference does not propose immediately after its opening, other countries. But Eretz Israel as venues for Jewish immigration, it will certainly arouse the public response that could put the importance of Eretz Israel in the shade. We are particularly worried that it would move Jewish organizations to collect large sums of money for aid for Jewish refugees, and these collections could interfere with our own collection efforts. End quote. With this all in mind, let's get back to the Patria ship terrorist attack. They try to memory hole. The ships Milos, Pacific, and Atlantic departed from the port of Tulcea in Romania, September 1940. On board 3,600 Jewish refugees from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. Early November, the Milos and the Pacific reached Haifa port with 1,771 visa-less immigrants on board. The British Coast Guard didn't permit them to land, and they were transferred to a French ocean liner, the Patria, which the British had specifically chartered in order to deport them to the island of Mauritius.
We were supposed to be transferred by help of this ship to Mauritius. So they started transshipping us from outside the port, from the immigrant ships, to the ship Patria, which in the meantime was turned into a troop transporter, which transported troops from India to the Middle East. Indian troops. So this ship was stopped at Haifa, requisited, and the British authorities started transferring us from the immigrant ship to the Patria.
The Patria ship was confiscated by the British in Haifa in June on behalf of the Allied war efforts after the fall of France. Deportation to Mauritius was an idea that emerged in London in the 1940s as one of the means for combating illegal immigration. After the arrival of the ships, High Commissioner Sir Harold MacMichael declared, quote, The British government can only regard a revival of illegal Jewish immigration at the present juncture as likely to affect the local situation most adversely, and to prove a serious menace to British interests in the Middle East. They have accordingly decided that the passengers shall not be permitted to land in Palestine but shall be deported to a British colony and shall be detained there for the duration of the war. He went on to say, quote, "It will be a matter for consideration at the end of the war. But it's not proposed that they shall remain in the colony to which they are sent, or that they should go to Palestine. Similar action will be taken in the case any further parties who may succeed in reaching Palestine with a view to illegal entry." End quote. There was a dispute regarding the Patria in a meeting of the Jewish Agency executive. One side argued the need to foil the plan by means of forceful action. The other side argued that the British policy was understandable in the context of the special circumstances of the war and the British desire to appease the Arab countries, especially at a time when Britain needed all the help it could get in its war against Germany. On the same day the British declared the deportation, November 20th, the quasi-government of the Jewish community in Palestine called for a general strike. Members of the United Kibbutz movement believed that the planned deportation needed a forceful response and action that might well entail the loss of life. In the Jewish Mapai political committee, there were still discussions ongoing on what actions to take. Others, delegated by Mapai members, smuggled a mine onto the Patria the morning of November 21st. A snag in its firing mechanism prevented an explosion, but preparations kept on going. On November 24th, the other illegal immigration ship, the Atlantic, with 1,183 refugees, was escorted into Haifa by the Royal Navy. The illegal immigrants of the Milos and the Pacific had been transferred to the Patria, and on the morning of the 25th, the first 200 from the Atlantic were being transferred as well.
And we moved in, and the Patria was furnished inside as a troop carrier. So there were beds, not luxury beds, but sacks filled with straw. That's wonderful if you have nothing else. And the beds were three, one on top of the other, with iron bars from the ceiling to the floor, and a lower bed, middle and upper. So I don't know how many she could carry out, but I would believe that 4,000 troops she can take. She was a big ship. My father and I we were pointed down, your place is here, and my mother went to where the women were. But we could meet on deck anytime. There were no limited hours when we could, we were not locked or something. And I remember, well, the crew, I think there was an Asian crew on the ship. And the Asian crew, for instance, took some grapes, went around and went to children and gave them grapes. I didn't get many grapes, maybe 3 or 4, but it was the goodwill that mattered. We did not experience anything wrong or evil on board the ship.
The Haganah, the Zionist militant group that were behind the terrorist acts we previously discussed, together with the Mapai political party leadership and the Jewish Agency, approved a plan to mine the Patria. A commander of the Haganah nominated Munya Mardor of the Special Operations Unit to execute the mining of the Patria. One of the Patria cooking ovens malfunctioned. This was either coincidentally or on purpose. Munya Mardor was acting as the head of 4-men technician team. A 1-kilogram mine was smuggled within their toolkits. The mine was handed over from the oven technicians to collaborators among the refugees' leaders. Both sides communicated in the Yiddish language. The British guards spoke no Yiddish nor Hebrew. The collaborators set the bomb against the external wall of the engine room and set it to go off to Monday, November 25th. At 9 a.m. The claimed intention for the bomb was to sabotage the ship and preventing its departure. Half a kilogram would have been sufficient, but the Haganah engineers prepared a bomb double the power. The bomb was also attached to the metal shield instead of to the internal engine. The consequences were catastrophic. The bomb ripped a big hole in the ship's bottom.
When I heard the explosion, I knew this is something bad that's damaging the ship. That's not just a loud noise. I was alone by myself at the worst place where I could be. That's down the hold. And when I go up, I got to go on the stairs here and there and the next stairs. And by the time I get there, there will be lots of people trying to go up the stairs. I was worried. I went like a cat upstairs, and on the stairs it was full of people, and they couldn't move because they disturbed one each other. If they had waited for a minute and let it loose, run away. Panic does those things. I went around them. I climbed places. I found different places and got out on deck. And where I got out, my father exactly was coming the opposite way. He was trying to get down to find me. So we met on deck. My mother was standing in the back near the railing. So we were together.
And the Patria tilted leftwise and filled with seawater within 10-15 minutes and sunk.
The ship sank within a few minutes. I think it took less than 10 minutes. The ship turned over towards its starboard side, to its right side. So my father and I helped my mother over the railing to the higher side, and then my father and I climbed over the railing because it started to lay down on its starboard side until it hit the ground. It was inside the port, so it was not very deep. And there were people running on deck because now it was the floor to them. They were running and still screaming and jumping into the water. And my father said, "Stay still, don't jump anywhere. We could feel that the ship touched the bottom. It cannot sink anymore." He grasped the situation fully and understood it.
267 people died.
Everybody who was on this side drowned. Everybody on this side, the British saw what happened and they tried to help. But people slide down and jumped into the water, and people throw children into the water.
There was a panic, and even people who didn't know to swim, ran and jumped into the water. Others were locked inside various places where they couldn't get out from.
1,343 refugees and 228 British crew members managed to survive. Some swam ashore. Others were saved by British security personnel and Palestinian port workers on boats and foot that rushed to the scene.
And the Arabs, the fishermen, they started to bring small ships and they took out people what they could.
Finally, we were picked up by boats from the outside and taken to one of the stores on the shore, inside the port area. There, to our great surprise, there were British women volunteers who were already ready to serve us with tea, coffee, cakes, you name it. This was exactly the reception we expected when we came to Israel. It changed because we were in an emergency situation. And we were well served, and they also very much helped with the saving lives and taking people out of the water and so on.
The British High Commissioner McMichael told Charette, the then head of the political department of the Jewish Agency, quote, "The fellow who had done it deserved to be hanged sky high," end quote, since it was clearly no accident. At the time, it was not known yet that Charette had a part in it. He later confessed in a letter in 1957. The scale of the Patriot tragedy led the British government to announce on the 27th of November that whereas the remaining 1,600 refugees on the Atlantic would still be deported to Mauritius, the 1,900 refugees who had been on the Patria when it sank would be allowed to remain in Palestine.
We were survivors of a sunken ship. And the law said that survivors from a sunken ship had to be saved and taken to a safe place. But the others of the three ships who were not yet transferred to the Patria they were also brought to Atlit, but locked away from us, and a few days later actually shipped to Mauritius, and we who were at the sinking, we were saved.
And so I was born in Tel Aviv. I was waiting, not on the ship, not in the sea, only in Tel Aviv, in Palestine. And I have a birth certificate that I am a Palestinian.
British Commander-in-Chief in the Middle East, General Wavell, protested this decision and telegraphed to the Secretary of State for War, Anthony Eden, on November 30th, quote, "Have just heard the decision regarding Patria immigrants. Most sincerely trust you will use all possible influence to have decision reversed. From military point of view, it is disastrous. It will be spread all over the Arab world that Jews have again successfully challenged decision of British government, and that policy of white paper is being reversed. This will gravely increase prospect of widespread disorders in Palestine, necessitating increased military commitments. It will again be spread that only violence pays in dealing with the British," end quote. On December 2nd, Churchill responded to the telegraph. He denied the revision of the decision, but added, quote, "On the other hand, Cabinet agreed that future consignments of illegal immigrants should be sent to Mauritius provided that tolerable conditions can be arranged for them there," end quote.
Would you say that the British policy was motivated less by anti-Semitism and more about fear of what the Arabs would do?
Yes, I think their policy was motivated by eagerness to satisfy the Arabs.
There was another group that planned to bomb the Patria, the Irgun militant group we also discussed earlier. They planned to fire a torpedo from a nearby boat at the Patria ship. The commander of the Irgun, David Raziel, was in Haifa at the time and was taken by surprise by the explosion. Initially, he instructed that no one would say this was not an Irgun action, but after the severity of the carnage became clear, he was quick to state they had no hand in it. The retrieval of the remains was a slow process, which took 11 years in total. In 1951, the last skeletons were retrieved when the remains of the Patria were removed altogether. In a debate sometime after the bombing in the Mapai Central Committee, one of the founders and commander of the Haganah, Elia Golamb, backed the attack and said, quote, "There are those who regard the Patria tragedy as a black day, while for others the case of the Atlantic is a black day. For me, Patria is not a black day, and is not the black day. They're purposeful victims, and such were the Patria victims. These were victims for the sake of Jewish immigration. The day of the Atlantic is, for me, a far blacker day than the day of the Patria." End quote. With the day of the Atlantic, he was referring to the day the illegal immigrants that remained on the Atlantic were transferred to other ships and departed to Mauritius. The claims of the disastrous effects of the bombing being a miscalculation have not been accepted by all. Some people are convinced the Zionists were trying to push Britain to reverse its white paper policy by cynically killing their own people and blaming it on the authorities. Either way, the brutality shown by Zionists to fellow Jews is breathtaking. The Israelis today accuse Hamas of using human shields and planting their missiles in civilian areas. Yet here, we have the Haganah, which later became the IDF, bombing Jews. This attack has strategically been buried from public education and media coverage, even more so than all the other brutal attacks of the Zionists. Because in this case, it blatantly showcases the facade of the Zionist ideology and emphasizes the important fact that Zionism does not equal Judaism.